hospital is a facility where the services remain accessible and functioning at maximum capacity and within the same infrastructure immediately following a natural disaster. It enjoys the highest level of protection possible when access routes to the health facility are open, and when water supply, electric power, and telecommunication can continue supplying the health facility. Sustainable hospitals are those which adopt sustainability principles in their design and functioning. To enlighten us further, we would like to call on the stage the speaker for the session, Ms. Shweta Menon, Principal Architect and Co-Director, Acme Consulting, Chennai. Ma'am started her career with Archimedes, a dedicated hospital design firm among the largest in India. Ma'am was also a part of the team at Acme that helped develop India's first patient-friendly hospital standards in collaboration with Association of Health Providers, India. This session will cover planning and design considerations related to safe and sustainable hospitals, including the best practices and relevant cases. We are eagerly waiting to hear from you, ma'am. The stage is all yours.
Good morning, everyone. This is actually quite an amazing program you have here every year, Symbiosis, so I really have to hand it to you guys for generating this awareness among your students itself, because it's best to know from your college years and from your postgraduate years on how to actually face life once you get out there. And you actually tend to learn all these only as you work, but then now that you've got this awareness and this platform, it's great that you're getting this exposure. So Symbiosis, thank you very much for giving me also an opportunity to be a part of this program. So the topic which I'm going to explain today is about safe and sustainable hospitals. What we need to understand is I'm an architect, and I've been part of all projects from its beginning. As architects itself, as people setting up hospitals, and as your management students, you will be part of the team itself from the beginning. Sustainability and safety is something that has to come from the first idea itself of creating your hospital. So this is something that can be incorporated from the early stages of your site selection, your building, the concept behind, the thought behind, everything is taken care of in every single step of the way. Now, one thing first we need to understand is the evolution our hospitals have gone through is mainly because of certain events that would have occurred in the hospital itself. Like, for example, the hospitals in the early 19th century would have begun with just a house being converted and patients being taken there and treated and care being given. It's only after plague hit that everyone realized that keeping so many people crowded together in a small space is causing the disease to increase, to spread among the patients. So that's when the idea of spreading them out, aerating the building, large windows, circulating the air, all that came into consideration. A little after that, Florence Nightingale came with the idea of how these patients should actually be arranged itself in her wards. And this is actually a concept that has been followed even in our hospitals even to date. So when you begin with a cramped space, you aerate the entire space, and that's when health is spread. Then you go a step further, arrange your patients, keep them at least 6 feet apart, because Florence Nightingale started observing that from one patient to another itself, the infection spread. So when a hospital is actually meant to take care of the patient, within it itself, when it creates a disease, then the purpose of the healthcare facility is lost. So she began that idea of how to cure following infection control methods, and also how important the caregiver themselves are, because they need to supervise each patient, have direct line of sight where the patient is, how they are, keep monitoring their progress. So then with her, the concept of wards came, which are still there in our hospitals today. I'm sure your general hospital has a lot of these wards as well. And this, of course, was followed as the requirements of the people improved, as the affordability improved, and as infection control became even more important, single rooms started coming up in hospitals. Now, of course, things have changed. All these basic requirements are met. So now it's the technology and it is the type of treatment that's being given that is driving our design. So the more sophisticated our technology needed, like for treating cancer, you need linear accelerators, large equipments in the basement, which from the plan stage itself, we need to consider so that the hospital has what it needs to even start off. And then, of course, we go into patient-friendly design, which is now a demand. Everyone seems to expect hospitals to be as good as hotels are. So then that becomes a key feature. So you need your rooms to be comfortable, you need large windows, because that itself is like a healing environment for the patient. There are a lot of tests done, evidence-based designs, where if a patient looks out the window and sees a comforting atmosphere, they recover faster. But one thing with the COVID that hit us, we have realized this, however prepared we are to treat the patient for the different illnesses they might have, we have to be prepared for really unpredictable events as well. We have over the years faced fires in hospitals, faced an earthquake, but that has still been in certain localities. But when COVID hit, it was an across the world event, and many hospitals realized that they were not designed to be able to handle the type of load that will come in during a COVID, or even during, that is when they look at the minute things of even when there's an earthquake somewhere, can your hospital actually stand that earthquake itself? If a hospital is the first thing to collapse, then where will people go to? So based on that, an underlining feature we architects now have realized that we have to keep in mind is we need to build to last. The only way our buildings can even progress, use the technology coming up, develop as it goes, is if the building itself stands, and it stands in a healthy way also. The hospital itself should not be a source for some sort of an illness coming to the surrounding community, because hospitals are known to create a lot of waste products that are really harmful. So the way they treat those products, the way they release it out to the atmosphere, all these have to be really considered. So building to last is going to be our base in safe and sustainable healthcare. So let's begin with safe hospitals. When can you call a hospital safe? A hospital is safe only if it stays standing after a disaster, that is, it doesn't collapse and kill the people within it. Then if it can handle the people coming in, the surge of people coming into it, if it can handle it, organize the people accordingly, give the right treatment, then they are safe. And lastly, the staff in the hospital must be trained to handle these situations. There is no point just having documents and papers on these are the escape routes. That is not enough. The staff themselves should have gone through a lot of mock drills and training sessions to understand this. So let's take disasters in general. Now there are so many disasters and there are different ways we can categorize them. So for this purpose, let's just categorize it into two sections: internal disasters and external disasters. So external disasters are those disasters that happen outside your hospital. So these are disasters the hospital themselves don't actually have a control on. It can come unexpectedly. It can be natural disasters or man-made. It can be an earthquake, a flood, or even a terrorist attack in a part of the town. But then this type of a disaster, the challenge the hospital faces, how is it going to handle the patients that come in? There will be a huge horde of them. There'll be a panic around within the hospital, outside. The community as a whole will turn to the hospital. So how do they handle such a load, and how will they face this challenge is what the main priority of these type of disasters are. Then next comes the internal disasters. These are disasters that happen within the hospital. These, as a majority, happens because of a negligence in the part of the hospital itself. They would not have followed norms while building it. They would not have taken safety measures necessary. The staff may not be prepared. So these will include fires within the hospital, some accidental leakage of gases, harmful gases, chemical release within the hospital, and actually can even be a shooter, which we see a lot in the US, which you never know when it comes to India, but a crazy shooter being out and loose inside the hospital as well. So every scenario needs a possible solution. And we actually consider even certain small things like an infection, hospital-acquired infection, or a simple fall which a patient might have as an accident that can happen within the hospital. So the main reason all these hospitals sometimes succumb to these challenges is because they are not prepared. Either their facility is not planned to handle it, their staff is not well trained, or there is not enough documentation of what has to be done, what has to be followed. The problem is when a disaster like this strikes is when we actually learn that these type of steps have to be taken, which is unfortunate, but now we should at least try to make sure that such situations don't happen. Like, for example, the Amri fire in Calcutta was when people realized that you're not supposed to put anything too flammable in the basement. Your labs, your diesel storage, or anything flammable should not be placed in the basement. That is where a fire can start, and a basement is practically the foundation of your building. People escaping from the building when fire is spreading from below is a very difficult task. Similarly, in Chennai, we have had the floods in Chennai, and Mayat Hospital, which is a very well-known hospital, who's giving really good treatment also, happened to have their generators placed in the basement and a few oxygen supply units placed in the basement. And when the flood hit, even though the patients themselves were not in the flood, but because these generators and oxygen supply units were in the basement, they got cut off from the patient, and quite a few died just because of the lack of oxygen supply. So these are things we need to avoid in our future designs. Now, like how I said earlier, the disaster management mainly has three aspects: planning, preparedness, and training. Now, as an architect, I'm actually going into the planning part of it because the other two are basically in manuals and how the staff is trained. So going into planning, we'll take the first simplest step, site selection. Always go deep into studying the type of site you're selecting, because now if the soil is not strong enough, you always have a risk of flooding. Your water table level is high, the soil can't take the load of the construction, it can collapse. Don't place your hospital, however pretty the site is, anywhere close to your flood or tsunami prone areas, because beachside is a really beautiful healing atmosphere. Not necessary. You have to check all these norms also. Earthquake is sometimes not avoidable, so always make sure that the structure is planned to suit a place that is susceptible to earthquakes. And of course, hillsides, it is not advisable unless you take the necessary measure, because landslides can happen at any time. So your hospital can be the one that slides, or something can collapse on top of the hospital itself. So site selection is a very important aspect. Actually, a part of the site selection, there's one more part which is actually pretty simple, but access roads. Just because you've got a large site but a very narrow road leading to it also is not a good sign. You're creating your own bottleneck. So in a normal case itself, there'll be traffic jams, your ambulance will get stuck either going out, coming in, either way can happen. And then when it's a pandemic that hits, then that entire road is blocked and no one can reach your hospital. Then of course is the structural design. It's a continuously running joke that architects and structural designers don't get along well with each other. I think it's because architects tend to go a little crazy on their design, while structural designers have a tough time meeting those requirements and making the building stable. But when it comes to a hospital, it is always better prioritize the structural engineer. Let his designs rule mainly, because beauty is, of course, a secondary element that is great to have in your hospital. But then if the structural engineer advises not to go too crazy or too flamboyant with your design, it's always best to reel it down, because a hospital has to stand. Irrespective of what the disaster that strikes, it has to stand. And even if you're considering converting a present building or converting a running hospital, but a new facility is taking over and running it, get your building checked. Make sure it is structurally stable. If it is not, then there are measures that can be taken to strengthen the building further. And then, of course, the type of materials you use. Don't compromise on the quality of the material just to save a buck or two, because the expense made now is something that will have to last for life. So then a little extra expense now just to make sure that the hospital is everlasting is, of course, definitely worth it. And all these designs that structural engineers make are based on soil test reports that are conducted at every site. So don't skip something like that. It has to be done. They will take boreholes at different points in your site, see how strong the soil is, and that is what will determine what type of foundation, what type of structure is going to be designed for that. And once it is designed, please don't deviate from it, because we are Indians, we have the mentality that once it starts coming up the terrace, let's use it for a lot of things. Let's add one more floor above. What is it? It's a pretty big structure. But no, let's discuss with the structural engineer first if it is capable. If it can take the load, great, go ahead. If it can't, the structural engineer, if your construction hasn't started, he can still make changes to the drawing to make the necessary requirements. But if he says no, then please, we need to really follow it. Then, of course, fire. Fire is something that is seen in very often, a bit too often, unfortunately. So the only way to prevent fire is from the early stages itself, planning your facility. First, begin with prevention. So use the necessary materials that are fire retardant, that can sustain. I mean, in case a fire does start, you can cordon off that particular area, which is, we call it as compartmentalization of a space. So if a fire does begin, that area gets closed off so that it doesn't spread to the rest of the hospital. And then, of course, our sprinkler, fire detector, smoke detector systems. Many hospitals, to save money, do avoid that. We have already seen that in many cases, as actually even now when we're designing there are. So it takes a little job to convince to go ahead with it. But then it's extremely important, and that too with this rise in COVID, there have been many hospitals that have had fire issues. And in Tamil Nadu itself, because of the number of issues that we have faced over there, government has now made it mandatory that every hospital has to have a ramp. It has to have a sprinkler system. The minute you go ground plus one and above, your sprinkler system is compulsory inside the hospital. Then, of course, planning and designing, because when a pandemic strikes, your emergency department is going to be overloaded. There will be a lot of people coming in, from the smallest scratches and burns to really serious cases. So a well-planned emergency department with a great triage area where you can assess the patients, decide how critical they are, what to do, whether to straight away transport them to the operation theater, or whether the emergency itself can handle it, or whether it's an ICU that they need because they've been stabilized there itself and they just need to be monitored. All that is determined in the emergency. So either initially itself plan a really good emergency, or make the space such that in case of a pandemic, you can open out into the next rooms or next areas, like if your main lobby and emergency lobby are kind of connected, kind of merge them all together so that you have a larger triage space, because triage has become a very critical aspect. Then, of course, in other parts of your hospital, your corridors being wide, your ramps and staircases being provided, which are also wide, it needs to handle the load. That is the purpose. Many places, they find it hard to believe why we are recommending 8 feet wide corridors when you can manage perfectly fine in a 5 to 6 feet wide. The purpose is you might cross. There'll be a stretcher going in one direction, there might be one coming the other direction. We can't just stop to let one pass. And that too, during a disaster, it will be running. People will be running either into the hospital or running out of the hospital. So both need to be taken care of. Then these are certain things like how I said, the small issues. Like in the earlier slide also, in design, there is a chance that a patient can just fall and they get hurt, and then it becomes the hospital's negligence. They came in to get healed and then they get hurt. So then ideally provide your disabled-friendly features, grab bars, anti-skid strips so that they don't fall. The tiles on the floor in your corridors and rooms should not be those glossy, shiny tiles. It should be a little matte finish, a little rough, so that they don't actually slip and fall over there. And of course, in infection control, to prevent diseases from spreading, we have different processes. Like in our OTs, we make sure that they are zoned appropriately from a protective area where the OT control will supervise, and then into a semi-sterile area where you've got your pre, post-ops, everything. Then a change complex, the doctors can change and then enter into the hospital, and then into the OT, and that's the sterile area, the OT corridor with its scrub and the OT itself. This type of zoning will prevent any infection from spreading. Your doctors, staff, everyone will go through a donning on and donning off of their scrubs also in this process. So all this zoning, these scrub stations, regular hand washes, all these are necessary to prevent a doctor, a staff, anyone from going from one patient to the other, without washing their hands. They themselves should not become carriers of these infections. Then, of course, we come to sustainable health. Now, sustainable, I know everyone's mind straight away goes to green and solar and wind and things. But actually, the way I'll explain solar, wind, all that will just be the last one slide. Before that, there are a lot of things that we need to consider. Now, when do we call a hospital sustainable? In school, we would have all had the definition of sustainability. It is development for the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to also develop. So that is the basic theme that hospitals should also profess, because they should not cause harm to the environment around them. They should be the main people to promote the health is their concept. And this is something that can be considered and planned in every single stage. Again, beginning from site selection to how you use the site, the materials you use in the site, the way the building itself is built, and how you consider the present requirements as well as the future requirements of the hospital. So let's take selecting your site. Now, you need to make sure that the hospital's carbon footprint is minimum. Now, a main source of this is basically burning of fuel. So burning of fuel is mainly from the type of vehicles that approach your hospital. There are ambulances coming to your hospital, there are cars coming to your hospital. So one major point we can keep in mind is keep your site somewhere close to a public transport. So that way, majority of the people coming to the hospital will use public transport, which is anyway running. They need not bring their own car vehicle. Try to encourage cycling. I think the trend is slowly going back to that, but it has not fully yet. And then, of course, in the vehicles you have inside the hospital, promote your eco-friendly material, either CNG or if you're going with electric or any of those. That is where you can promote that and reduce the amount of carbon dioxide produced in and around your hospital. Then comes the site preservation. There are actually two types of site. There is brownfield sites and greenfield sites. The main thought is greenfield is brand new. It is literally green. There is nothing been ever built on that site. It is a fresh piece of land. And brownfield is a land where people have already got into it, built and demolished, or built and left a structure there, anything. It is always best to go with the brownfield site because, well, basically you've already killed that site. So let's not go into killing a fresh site. So then go with brownfield sites. It will be inside the city itself. There will be things nearby. And it's already used as a construction, so there's a lot of cement and things already mixed with the soil. Nothing much can grow anymore on that. So go ahead and use a brownfield site. And in case you do use a site with a lot of trees and plants on it, don't just knock them off, because I know I can't say that avoid trees and build. That is not possible because financially also the hospital has to be viable. So sustainability is actually that also, financial viability. So build as much as you want, but instead of cutting down these trees, uproot them and either plant them somewhere in your site itself or plant it somewhere outside. In your site, then they themselves become the healing environment needed for your hospital to, treat your patients and bring them out quickly. Then, of course, materials. Do a little study on the materials that are being used. Check its entire life cycle. See if its process of being acquired as a raw material to the process it goes through to use and reuse are all considered, and make sure that they are those. Like, for example, nowadays steel structures are becoming a lot more common than brick. Even concrete is more common than brick. The main thought is brick, the reusability of brick is not as much. We can still use it by breaking it up and using it as landfill or rubble or something, but then steel and concrete are things that can be completely reused to be made into fresh blocks or use fresh beams and columns and everything. So the reusability is a lot better. So materials, how you select them will become a key aspect. Then, of course, how you plan your facility. Just because you've got 5-6 acres of land does not mean you have to build the entire facility. Look at it financially also. Start small, start strong, and as you develop, the building that's already there will finance the rest of the expansion. And there is no point in having a really large facility when the entire facility is not going to be occupied as a whole. So start gradually, start with 50 beds, 100 beds, then just gradually keep evolving. And your space is also true that everyone looks at hotels and hospitals to be like hotels, but then that doesn't mean we need to give too large waiting areas, lobby, lounges and things. Take a little area into the other support aspects as well, because there are things like clean utility, dirty utility, your floor pantries, your sterile store, your equipment bays. All these are very important aspects in hospitals, and plan them so that your staff does not have too much running around to do when they're within the facility, because exhausting them, wasting their energy is also like a waste to the whole sustainable concept. So by this we can avoid wasting space, wasting the resources to condition that space, wasting the materials to build that space, and wasting people's energy to, run around that space. Then, of course, patient-friendly is, again, an aspect that I've already mentioned before. So then doing this little extra, using those trees, keeping it outside, taking the extra measure, the grab bars, the treatment, taking extra measure for your staff. Keep your staff happy, your patients will be happy. Your patients actually not just look for the happy surroundings, they look for the happy staff who will be treating them as well. So keep your staff happy, give a good lounge, give a nice place for them also, give a comfortable movement zone for them. Automatically, your patients will be happy, they will recover faster. And hospitals don't make money on the IP beds being occupied, they make money on the treatment. So the sooner your patient recovers, the sooner they leave, the sooner the next patient can occupy the space. Same way with this is actually just this and the next slide are both about planning for the current needs and the future needs. So current needs are like how your lean design, which I had mentioned earlier, that you plan just for the requirement. That is what you need to do. Don't compromise your requirements. Meet whatever has to be met currently itself and plan that accordingly, but keep a flexibility for future needs as well. Now, this can either be your building is pretty big, you can build 3-4 floors above. Initially itself, tell your structural engineer this building is for the total height that you plan to reach in the future, so that later you can build. Or you've got a site behind, which you can buy later on and expand into. So then the design has to be made such that both can be connected smoothly at a future date. Or you've got a large area already, but you can't afford about 6 operation theaters in one shot. Start with 3. Modular operation theaters have made that possible. Start with 3, close off the corridor, leave the other space empty for now, and then later expand into that space. So giving a flexibility, giving possibility of future development is always necessary, because your hospital has to live long. It has a long life, it will have to go on. Then, of course, the last topic on renewable energy. This is like a final touch that we can do to the hospital. Now, solar, of course, has become very important in like our Tamil Nadu guidelines itself. We've got hospitals after a certain size have to have solar energy. It's become compulsory, and I'm sure it's there in other state laws as well. But it's a very good aspect to have. So solar, your water recycling, because there's a lot of water waste created in a hospital. So it needs to go through the effluent treatment plants, the sewage treatment plants, everything. And the water that can be used gets formed. This can be used again, flush water, gardening, all those purposes. So recycle, reuse, these are all aspects. Rainwater harvesting. There's a lot of areas in India going through a drought, and there are another section going through a flood. But then the drought areas can at least harness the little rain that they do get and use that water again, gets pumped into the system or recharges the bore wells below. So this is a final touch that we can give to our facility, and that will take it one step further. The earlier ones are all basic things that we'll need to follow. This will take your facility a step further if any of these can be nicely and smoothly integrated into your planning. So basically what the whole concept of safe and sustainable architecture is, that architecture or design or setting up from either doctors, your management students, us, anything, the main concept is that doing a hospital that is safe and sustainable will get you, one, the trust of the society, trust of the people around you, and it is financially viable, the sustainability aspect. So it's basically a win-win situation. So then the main underlying factor is building trust and getting that financial viability into your system. This will automatically make sure that your hospital runs strong and runs long also. So yeah, basically that's what it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your invaluable insights about the hospital design. And as you said, a design built to last, and its overall impact on nature and people. We can spare a few minutes and take 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Thank you very much for a very lucid presentation, ma'am. My question, actually, if I'm permitted, 2 questions. One is that you mentioned that in Tamil Nadu, the law has come that all hospitals have to have ramps. What about existing hospitals that do not have ramps? How do they negotiate this law, and how can they incorporate ramps in their existing structure? And number 2 is green building accreditation. How does it help a hospital investing in that, as far as legal and financial rewards are concerned?
Taking the first part of your question, regarding ramps, there is a new set of laws that have been released in Tamil Nadu that says hospitals that are already set up still need to have ramps, but it need not be the size which is actually given in the main laws, because main laws ask for 8 feet wide ramps. Your slope has to be 1:12 ratio, which means for a 1 meter height that you climb, about 12 meters of the length should be there of the ramp. But then now they've relaxed that a little bit just for existing hospitals, not for new ones. So in case you don't have the space for a ramp, you either, if you have a little space, you can make a narrow ramp that just satisfies, in case of an emergency, bringing patients down. Otherwise, they encourage making your lifts into fire safety lifts, so that in case of a fire also those lifts still run. So that is how at the moment they are planning. And of course, encouraging, if your sprinkler systems, your firefighting systems are not in place, making sure that those are installed. Because ramp is a very space-intensive thing. So if the space is there, you have to. In case you've convinced them that the space is not there, then these are certain other measures you'll have to take. And regarding green buildings, yes, now making a building green, like as per LEED, to that extent, is an expensive process, but definitely worth it. Because now a lot of large corporate hospitals are going ahead and doing that, because yes, the initial payment is a lot, because you are checking right down to the lux level of your light, how much energy that light is using, how much energy the air conditioning is using, timings, temperatures, all that is checked. This is not just putting solar panels or putting wind turbines. It's right down to how much energy your hospital uses. So it is an expensive process, but then once you set that in place after that initial amount of payment being made, then you slowly, gradually start making the profit over that, because then your energy is conserved, all that, only after a few years you'll reap the benefits, but then there will be a lot of benefits by doing that.
Thank you, ma'am, for your very nice lecture. I would like to ask regarding the site planning you said. Apart from the beds and the hospital capacity, there is significant movement in the corridors. So horizontal movement system will include both patient and logistics.
Yes,
and there will be vertical movement system through the lift. So what are the factors that would influence the location and size of this two movement system in terms of conserving energy and facilitating movement? Thank you.
Actually, our fire norms have certain standards for the distance a person can run during an emergency. So it ranges from 30 meters to 22.5 meters and things. So usually when we position staircases, which are also your vertical movement elements, we position them within each of these fire zones, so that in 22.5 meters, anyone running from any corner of your hospital reaches the closest staircase. So that is a law that is already set. Our National Building Code has these rules. So staircase positions are usually planned according to this. Lift, of course, doesn't fall under fire, because fire norms actually say that when there's a fire, shut off your lifts, because the lift shaft is what spreads the fire. So usually lifts we locate based on the departments and how close. Like, for example, keep it close to where your emergency is. If you can afford multiple lifts, then emergency can have its dedicated one, which will go straight to your OT complex, outside your OT complex, not inside, outside, so that the patient can go through the pre-op and everything before entering inside. And then there'll be a visitor lift that can be in the main lobby and that can connect. So lift positions are mainly based on functionality and how quick it is to take a patient from either, let's say, the critical areas, from the emergency to the diagnostics to the OT to the ICU. This is the first priority. After this only we prioritize the actual walk-ins who come and how they have to move around.
As we are running short of times, I'd request the audience to please reserve your questions for the next session. Now I request Dr. Alka Chandak ma'am, Director, Symbiosis Center of Healthcare, to kindly felicitate Ms. Shweta Menon ma'am.